Hello, I'm John Myers, and welcome to From the Top. And I hope you like the jacket. That's a new idea. Any of us who were thrilled at the 2010 Winter Olympics at Vancouver will probably have heard of, if they haven't actually seen, my next guest. Chris Rudge was the chief executive of the Canadian Olympic Association. He was also the chairman of Own the Podium, and we did incredibly well. Chris, nice to have you on the show.
It's good to be here.
I'm going to start at the beginning, though, because I understand you're a Brit.
I am born in Coventry and emigrated to Canada at a very young age, 4 or 5 years old. My dad had been in the RAF. There's no work in England. He worked in the aircraft industry, and he managed to get a job in Malton working on the Avro Aero, which many Canadians will have heard of.
So, great sportsman at school, achieved top marks in all your things?
No, not particularly. I was always interested in sport. I think that maybe the inspiration came from when I came to Canada and I was 5 or 6. I got polio, and I was paralyzed and in the hospital for a long time.
What, from the waist down?
Waist down. My legs were paralyzed. I had to learn to walk again. And I always look out the other window at the other kids playing games and that, and wishing I could be out there. And sport took on a disproportionate role, I think, in my life.
Wow.
Not particularly a great athlete, but reasonably accomplished. But I certainly played everything I could. And as a student, I was bright enough to get by without too much hard work. But,
so you got back the use of your legs, what, within a couple of years?
Yeah, over the period of a year or so.
So were you brilliant at school? Here's a future chief executive in the making?
No, I don't think any yearbooks would ever say that I was destined to become any kind of a corporate executive. I got by. I did fairly well in school with minimum effort. Was always told I was an underachiever. Finally got fed up with that in grade 12, and I worked my buns off and stood first in my class, and then said to the staff, enough, get off my case now. I've shown you I can do it. And I went back to sort of my mediocre ways again last year of high school.
But good enough, presumably, to get into university.
Yeah, good enough to get into University of Toronto, which didn't have luckily the standards weren't as high as they are now, but I got into University of Toronto. And I purposely picked University of Toronto because I grew up out near Malton, beside the airport, had spent very little time in the city as a youngster. And also I was kind of growing as an individual. And I purposely wanted to go to a school that was highly integrated with the city, the urban life, the rest of the community, that was big where I could kind of lose myself and grow. And University of Toronto provided all of that.
Did you have any goals at that stage?
No, it's funny. I've never, and I still, I'm 67, and running the Argonauts now and the Grey Cup Festival. And I say to people, I still don't know what I'm going to do when I grow up, because there are some more careers out there ahead of me. So no, I've never had a specific career objective or goal. And maybe that's one of the reasons I developed, I think, a fairly eclectic skill base at a young age. I did learn to work hard because we didn't have a lot of money, and particularly with Dad losing his job, I always had lots of jobs. And I learned a lot about work environments, about how people interact with businesses, about what makes people motivated to succeed, etc. And I was acquiring knowledge and skills that I didn't realize I was acquiring, and that would stand me in good stead as I got older, and they became integrated into what I was as a person. One of the things I've always said is that as quickly as you can in life, find a mentor. But that doesn't mean you have one mentor. You have somebody that can help you for a period of time as you're progressing in a career or education or whatever. And you can have a whole succession of mentors, and it's not uncommon to sometimes surpass the mentor, but you find someone that you can attach yourself to that can teach you the way, be your guide in a sense. So there were a number of teachers in high school. There was a guy named Al Savell that was particularly inspiring to me. A number of profs in university and people that I worked with in various job environments who I would say mentored in a sense that I watched how this person worked and said, I can learn from that individual, and I can become a better person. So
learning all this, you're now at university, not doing phys ed.
Well, no, I studied phys ed at university. Well, I started in honor science. They told me in high school that I was good in sciences, so I should go into sciences, so I ended honor science. Thought maybe I'd be a geologist. And I had 8 courses, failed 7 of them. The 8th I got 50, physics lab, I remember that. And but the year, it wasn't a complete bust because I learned a lot about myself. I'd saved the money to go to university on my own. I still had lots of part-time jobs. I started driving a taxi at nights, and I drove a cab all through university. Worked as a waiter and a bouncer in some bars, things like that. And
you started your own business at some stage there, didn't you?
When I graduated, myself and another chap started a company called Showbiz Associates. And we used to produce fashion shows and industrial shows. We'd work part-time in a few. And it turned out for the year to be a non-profit organization. It wasn't intended to be, but it was a good excuse to meet and date lots of models. So it was lots of fun.
Very useful for later on.
Yeah, it was. It was.
And so you became a teacher for a bit.
Taught from 1971 to 74, Lawrence Park Collegiate and Western Tech. Subsequently, I'd played a lot of lacrosse when I was younger, junior A, senior lacrosse, was on a Man Cup for Brooklyn Redmond. They started a National Lacrosse League in 1974 and 5, and I got drafted and managed to make the team in Syracuse. So I left teaching, went and played lacrosse in Syracuse for a year, and then the franchise went up to Quebec City, and I went up there and managed the franchise the next year. So a bit of a hiatus in the mid-70s.
Yes. That was the end of that league then?
League didn't last because the Olympics came into Montreal. They couldn't choose there was a team in Montreal called the Quebecois. They could not use the Montreal Forum because the Olympics were coming in '76. Montreal wasn't going to stay in the league. Quebec was going to fall out if Montreal wasn't there, so the league collapsed. And then I went back to teaching again for another 3 years.
So then you started your business career then?
I did. And I was around 35 at the time. And I looked around, decided I wanted to get into the business world. And I said, okay, what are the entrees? Finance, I didn't have the specific skills. Human resources, I thought were a little dry. MIS was just sort of starting up in those days. Again, needed specific skills I didn't have. Sales and marketing seemed to be a natural. I'm a fairly gregarious individual. I understood and knew people well. I'd had the experience of talking to groups. Education teaches you to be well organized, etc. As a teacher, you need to manage your time well. All the skills that I thought were adaptable to business. So I ended up going into the business world and started out selling advertising space for the Financial Post newspaper, which was owned by McLean Hunter in those days.
We'll take a short break now, and we'll see you later. Welcome back. I'm talking to Chris Rudge, and we're now going to be looking at the business career. So, top salesman within a couple of months?
Oh, hardly that. But, I stepped into an environment that was pretty unique. There were some great people that worked there. There were a lot of people that I could learn from. The guy that was the director of the whole program at the time was a guy named Alan Singleton-Wood, who was quite a character. He was one of those people that made you believe that you could do almost anything, and he was an Englishman, great piano player, really dynamic. So it was an interesting environment to go into, but it was not an easy transition. I mean, I left teaching at a time when there was a surplus of teachers, so there was no going back, and I stepped into this business environment that had a whole new language, a lexicon of expressions I knew nothing about, media data information. I had to learn all these things, and I remember well, about 2 weeks I'd been there, and the office was at 481 University Avenue, University in Dundas. And I went for a walk at lunch one day, and I was trying to sort my way through all this, and I went over to the old Simpson store, which is the Bay at Queen Street now. And I was walking through the main floor, in the cosmetics department, just thinking about how confused I was. And I stood there and I just started crying in front of all these people. Somebody said, "Are you all right, sir?" I said, "I'm fine. I'm having a cathartic moment." And I dabbed my eyes and I walked back to the office and carried on, and eventually, learned what the job was about and applied the skills I had and the things that I thought we had to do. And I started having a lot of success pretty quickly, and I got promoted a number of times, and within 3 years I was the national advertising sales manager. So
now, to so many people, when you say salesman, they get groan, foot in the door, really annoying, rings me up in the middle of my dinner. What is it that about sales that you enjoyed? Because
I think sales is at the core of virtually everything that we do, every business. The sales interchange, it's part of everything in life. Whether you're a young man dating a young lady, whether you're trying to sell a product or service, whether you are a politician trying to get elected, and on and on and on. Everything you do is about working with people to identify an opportunity, a solution to a problem, etc., helping solve that problem, you trying to bring the solutions, the services, the product that might do it, etc., and working together to affect that change and affect that solution. And if you're going to be successful in a professional sales environment, whatever product or service it is, you have to believe in the integrity and the quality of your product, that it exists for a reason, it helps people solve problems, and it may not be for everybody. And you do yourself a disservice if you sell something to someone that they don't really need. It'll diminish your own integrity, etc. But if you're working in a real environment where you've got something you genuinely believe is going to enhance the quality of business or the quality of life for someone, it becomes, I think, a relatively easy sell, because you're there to help solve problems.
But there you were with Financial Post, one of dozens of people selling exactly the same thing. Possibly one or two might be even better. So how did you succeed in that? What would your advice be
Well, I think in any business, in terms of building a business, never mind just selling, but when I talk about, when I moved further upstream and I started running a lot of companies and buying them and et cetera, it's always important to understand that your point of differentiation in a cluttered marketplace is very important, and that you've got to be able to help people distinguish between what you do, who you are, and all the other clutter that is out there. And I don't know why I recognized that early, but I did when I got into the sales career. There were a lot of people out there selling space, we called it in those days, and competing for the attention of the person that's going to buy. And I did know that when you're selling, you have to have the attention of the person that you're talking to, and there are lots of ways to do that, and I had lots of tricks to do that kind of thing. Got a couple of great sales stories in that area. But one, very quickly, is, okay, why remember me? A lot of people are selling space, etc. What makes me different? Well, there was a flower shop at the top of my street. I was living on Erskine Avenue at the time, just north of Eglinton and Yonge. Helen Simpson Flowers. I did a deal with them, and they had a fresh boutonniere for me every morning. And I'd get a rose boutonniere, and I put it in my lapel, and I wore a rose virtually every day. And all the people I would call, and I'd call back and say, oh yeah, you're the guy with the flower. So there was a reason to remember me. And there's an old saying in sales: people will find a reason to buy from someone they like, and they'll find a reason not to buy from someone they don't like.
I think that's true.
So establishing those relationships was always very important in selling.
Tell me about how you bought your own company.
Well, it was an interesting exercise, because again, it's people say sometimes, Chris, how come you can do all these things? Because you weren't trained to. I didn't have any business academic training or anything like that. I learned on the go. But I understood people. That's always stood me well. I understood how to motivate, get the best out of people, etc. And I also have always had, I don't know where it came from, but I had this a certain naivety. I felt that maybe one of my best skills was being naive. And when you're naive, it leads you to believe that you can do anything, even though you're not at all qualified to do it. And what I found out very quickly is, if you take that approach, very quickly people move out of the way and they let you do it. And if you're smart and you get good people around you, you'll succeed. So I just kept on. There was a formula that seemed to work, and it had been working. So I decided I could buy this business, and it was owned by a guy who was going to retire. His family didn't want it. It was about a $18 or $19 million printing company, 200 or 300 employees. And I found an accountant. I said, listen, that's this company I'd like to buy, and you've been highly recommended to me through a personal friend, mutual friend. He said, yeah, we do valuations and acquisitions. I'd be happy to work on it with you. I said, well, there's a catch. He said, what's that? I said, well, I don't have any money to buy the business, and I don't have any money to pay you to do this. So he said, well, you've got a lot of balls. I said, well, all you can do is throw me out, but I'm here. Why don't you listen to my story? So I told him the story. He said, well, let me think about this. And so he called me back in a few days. He said, you know what? He said, I have to take a risk sometime, and I like your style. So I'll have some meetings with their accountants. If I think you can do this the way you described it, we'll move ahead. If not, I'll keep working, but on a fee-for-service basis. So that's more than fair. So he called me back in another week or two, and he said, I think you can do this. And within 3 weeks, I bought the company for just under $4 million, conditional on financing. I had no money. time, and I had 3 weeks to find some investors. I'd pre-lined up several and ended up with a couple of guys, one guy that I knew from college who'd made a lot of money in the real estate business, who put up the money, gave me 30% of the business, made me president, gave me a big bonus for finding the deal, gave me a good salary, and by June 1st I'd left and was running this company. Showed up the first day and said, what the heck does a president do?
Why did they then approach you to be the chief executive of the Canadian Olympic Association?
Well, Jim Thompson, who had been hired as the CEO of the Olympic Committee, had had a heart attack. They were looking for a new CEO in early 2003. And I knew some people in that world, and I got a call, went through some interviews, and away we went. So I got hired in early 2003 as the CEO of the Olympic Committee. I guess it started in February of 2003.
We'll come back to that now. We'll take another break, and we'll see you soon. Welcome back. My guest is Chris Rudge, and we're just about to start about his next stage of his life with the Canadian Olympics. What were your thoughts on starting? What were you going to do? What would you bring to this when you started the job?
Well, you know, here's the strange thing. All the years that I was running business, I used sport metaphors. You know, we've got a team, the other guy's got a team. Let's read the rule book, throw out the ball, and let's go and kick some butt. And you're the coach, and you get the best players, and you motivate them, and away you go.
Do you suppose that's why what they saw in you, someone who could actually put a business aspect on it?
I don't know. I think maybe to some degree, and the fact that I did know sport as well, that certainly helped. So there was, in a sense, there was a confluence of passions and skills there. So I think being able to distill what had to be done down to some very clear objectives was important, and then to try and identify the people who could help us be successful and work with those people, and to sell that vision to a much broader constituency of leaders in the sport community, leaders in the media community in Canada, in the political community. That became really the big challenge, was going out and selling that and fighting for it. And it was a very difficult challenge. It's the sport world, the amateur sport world, as they call it, is a very, very difficult world to work in. It's a world that is saturated with the intoxication of power. The Olympic brand, the Olympic experience is highly seductive. People cling to power, you know, in some unique ways there. And it tends to prostitute a lot of the ideals that should drive the Olympics forward. And you see it all the time, and we could talk about that forever. Juxtaposed to that is the beautiful ideal, the wonderful ideal of all the good things that the Olympics represent in terms of young people trying to pursue dreams and visions and to be the best they can be, and to share that with people from around the world. There was no experience in this world like being inside the Athletes' Village dining hall at an Olympics, where you have a diversity of culture, spirituality, economics, politics, etc. Unlike anything else in the world, everybody's celebrating the best they can be in spite of where they've come from, and setting aside all the other differences that tend to divide the world in many ways. And so it's a metaphor for what a good world could and should be. So it's a very inspiring environment like that.
And we know Vancouver was a great success. Own the Podium was a new thing that seemed to succeed.
Yes.
Any other reason why you think it was a success?
Well, on the Podium, you know, it was unique the way that was created, because it was the inspiration of the late Mark Lowry, who was a colleague of mine at the COC. And Mark, he recognized quickly that we had to do some unique things to be successful in Vancouver. And one of the things that inspired it really was a comment that Dave Perkins, a journalist from the Toronto Star, made when we were having a closing press conference in Athens in 2004, and we hadn't done well. Had 12 medals, and we were complaining about the lack of government investment and all of these things, you know, and making excuses for failure in a sense. And I'll never forget, at the end of that conference, Perkins, it was his turn for a question, he said, "That's fine, Chris," he said, "but what are you going to do about it?" And I thought, you know, we've abdicated our responsibility to lead. And I turned to Mark afterwards. I said, "I'm never going to sit up here and have that kind of question asked again." I said, "We have to do something about this. Never mind all the problems. We've got to overcome the problems." And that's when we really started to move it forward. And we couldn't do it ourselves. It had to be collaborative. So really, Own the Podium was created by, it was a dream that Mark had. We brought in Kathy Priestner to do research on the strengths and weaknesses of our winter sports. We were able to convince all the sports to participate in that process. We were able to convince a number of people to help finance the research, etc. Sport Canada, VANOC and John Furlong, the organizing committee, Paralympic Committee, CODA, the agency in Calgary, the Olympic Committee, we all paid for the research. And then we got others on side to start lobbying for the money in the corporate and the business world and the political world to finance it. And John Furlong and VANOC were a great help in that, and we got the VANOC sponsors on board. We got the Canadian government on board, and it was all done because we were able to articulate a vision for success that had a return on investment for everybody that bought into the program. And I learned very quickly, when you're going to government to ask for financing for sport or things like this, you can't go and say, I'm passionate, therefore you should give me money. Well, everybody's up there with their hands out. And I made it a business case. We went up and said, listen, here's the return on investment. And people that are elected to serve this country, they are looking for a return on investment just like anybody else. They want to be seen to be spending tax dollars wisely, notwithstanding the cynicism that's out there. They are trying to do a good job. Everybody's asking, so again, what's your point of differentiation? Well, here's what's in it for you. If we can do this, we can inspire a nation. We can change the way we think about ourselves. So the thing started to get traction. We got the research. We got the leadership in when we hired Roger Jackson to manage it. And I was the chair. We had a board of people that were sort of keeping all these collaborative groups together. And we set a very bold objective of saying, and we actually went to the sports, said, if we could get you all the resources you needed, what do you think we could do once we had the research? They came back and said, Chris, we think we could be number one. Well, what an un-Canadian thing to say. We don't say that, Americans say that. But we said, okay, if that's what we believe that we can do, then that has to be the objective that we set. And so we set that objective to be number one, and we started to work towards it, just like you would in any business. Mm-hmm. Here's where we are today. There's where we want to go. These are the resources we need to get there. This is what we have to accomplish. Here's what everybody's doing. Here's how we're going to evaluate them. Yeah. Here's the feedback, and we ran it that way. And it changed this country in many ways. The Own the Podium, OTP, has become an audacious expression of Canadians being not afraid to stand up and say, I think that I can do this. And we don't compromise our other wonderful Canadian ideals by doing that. The two aren't mutually exclusive. It's not one or the other. You can try to be very good, and you can be a good guy at the same time.
And we're now on the eve of the Grey Cup, centenary match. That's your latest challenge.
Biggest party this city's ever seen. We're going to have a ball, 100th anniversary of what is the annually the greatest celebration in this country. And because it's the 100th, we're going to make it longer and bigger. It's going to engage this community, we hope, in some exciting ways. A couple of my colleagues from the Olympics are over working with me on it.
What's the date? When is it?
It's the game is November 25th, and the festival's roughly the 16th to the 25th, or the 15th to 25th. And our motto is an invitation to our nation. We want to create on the streets of Toronto what we experienced in Vancouver when Canadians come together and celebrate ensemble, those things that make us special. We want that to happen here. At the same time, I'm running the Argonaut football team, and we hope that that team is progressing and is going to get in the game. That would be great.
And I could ask you the stupidest question of all, of course, then when you've succeeded in that, you're going to put your feet up and enjoy yourself, of course, aren't you?
No, I don't think so. We'll see what the next thing is to do. I've got working on a few other ideas already. But I've committed to Mr. Braley that owns the football team that I'll stick with him for 2 or 3 seasons and get this thing fixed and turned around and create an economic model that gets it in the black so it's got enterprise value and can continue to rebuild the CFL brand in this city.
Good luck with that, and it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris.
Always a pleasure.
And that concludes our show. I hope you tune in for the next one. My guest today was Chris Rudge. Goodbye.
So why is it that most speakers just don't measure up? In fact, 9 out of 10 speakers bore you to tears. Well, the answer is that they think they've got to be somebody they're not. Articulate, speak in long, flowing sentences. That's not what their audiences want. They want their speakers to be genuine, to be sincere. Are you interested in speaking with impact? Well, give me a call. At Black Owl Consultants, we teach leaders to stand out whenever they speak.